Setting up. Let's see if it works.
Beautiful. I'm excited.
Yay. So good to be able to be on this screen with you, my dear friend.
Likewise, Brenda. I'm so excited.
Yes, it is great. I am lucky enough to be here with my dear friend, Sharina. So it's I'm so grateful that you got to say yes to come play with me in Facebook land. But I'm Brenda St. Louis. I'm a financial therapist and a money coach. And this entire month is all going to be about diving into what I talked about in my last Facebook Live, the 4 elements to creating a healthy relationship with money. And this week is all about mindset. So I was so lucky for you to say yes, because Coach Sharina Cruz is a holistic career coach, but she's also a coach that touches so many aspects of our lives, talking about work, but also talking about mindset and our connection to our success and what we like in life. And one of the things that Sharina shared with me was that there's so many people that feel like an imposter when they stand in their being seen in the world and showing up as an expert or showing up as just what they want to do in their life. So we thought it would be great to have a discussion about overcoming that imposter syndrome. But before we go into that, welcome. Thanks for coming. Thanks for being here, Sharina.
Thanks so much. I really appreciate the opportunity to be able to have this chat with you and to have this conversation about something that's so meaningful to both of us and the work that we do and the impact and the value that we want to have in not only our clients, but the world at large. So thanks so much, Brenda.
Oh, so exciting to be here.
And about something that's so meaningful to both that we want to have in not only our clients, but the world at large. So thanks so much, Brenda.
Oh, so excited. Well, we have some overlay of volume. I don't know if you noticed that. Yes.
Yeah, well, technology, right?
I'm struggling with imposter syndrome, where I feel like I don't always completely understand this platform, and I seem to always kind of screw it up on some level, but I'm okay with that.
Listen, it's my first time, so this is all new and exciting, and it's part of the journey and the adventure. I love it.
That's great. Fantastic. So let's get there. Like, I know that we were talking about that whole mindset of how, what you think is is actually what happens. Like, in my belief system and how I work with clients and everything, is that when I talk about mindset, I often am talking about the points of view and the belief systems that are holding us back, right? So I'm curious to ask you to dialogue on how that can show up with clients as imposter syndrome.
For sure. You know what? I'm gonna sort of like zoom out and talk a little bit about the fact that for me, and the reason why I'm so excited about this conversation is when I work with my clients, it's really about helping them achieve what I call harmonious success, right? And harmonious success is really about building a fulfilling life, career, business that's meaningful to them, right? And when I explain sort of my simplified equation, just like your 4 pillars, I say, look, the first piece is vision. What is it that you're really working? What are you building? What are you wanting to create for your life, your career, your business? And that's really the first thing, the clarity with that. And then the second piece of the equation is mindset, right? So do you have a personal philosophy that serves you? And if it doesn't, what needs to shift in order to make that vision a reality? And it could be wealth, and it could be financial freedom, it could be, the career of their dreams, right? And the third piece of the action of the equation is action. So, at the end of the day, what are the numerous things that you can do, right? So for me, it's vision plus mindset plus action equals harmonious success. And the big piece that people really struggle with, right, once they get clarity of what they want to work on, is really that mindset. Like that's the biggest struggle. That's the biggest challenge that people have. And I find that it shows up in a lot of different ways. And imposter syndrome is one of them, kind of feeling like, you're a fraud and that you're going to be found out, or that, you're not like worth it, or that your value isn't what it should be, but really it's our mind playing tricks on us. right? And stopping us from really living the life that we deserve.
You know, when I hear about imposter syndrome, because it is the term, right? Like people, like, especially as an entrepreneur running your own business, it's always like you feel like an imposter because you're like, there's always someone that can do it better than you, or that has been doing it longer than you, or has more skill than you. And I know for me, like, I'm like that. Like, I've created this career. Like, I don't know very many financial therapists. I don't know people that really focus on both financial literacy at the same time as the emotional stuff. So I was like, I feel like I'm pioneering it, and I'm like, I really don't know what I'm doing. Like, I'm feeling away in the dark, kind of figuring out how it works. And I've been doing that for 11 years. So I got really comfortable with um faking it until I make it, in a way. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
And and it's almost like I think I have a really intimate relationship. Like, I don't feel so much like an imposter, but at large times in my life, I felt like a fraud.
Mhm.
Like, people are entrusting me with understanding and holding this container for their money. And I had a lot of skill in holding containers and holding and like being present for people. But then I put the name money on it. And I'm like, oh, well, I'm supposed to have $1 million. I'm supposed to be super wealthy if I work with people with money. And so everyone would project on me that I got all my shit together
Mm.
and that financially I'm totally on it, and which isn't and hasn't been true throughout my life. So what would does that happen
Oh,
with people? Like, do you?
everybody, it is unbelievable. I have the privilege of working with a wide variety of clients, right, from new grads, or people just starting off in their career, all the way to CEOs, to C level, to entrepreneurs, some really recognizable brands out there, and everyone goes through it, right? There's
Mhm.
the fallacy that because you have a certain amount of success by societal definitions, that you have everything figured out. And the reality is, we never do, because we're ever changing, ever evolving, ever growing creatures, right? Mindset. I remember sort of that pivotal moment, and I'm curious about yours, when you realized how important it was and how powerful it was. It was, for me, it was about 20 years ago, and it's been a nonstop journey. It takes intentional work every single day to really cultivate a more empowering, like, way of being, frame of mind, in terms of the things that we want to achieve. And when we get to that first milestone or our next milestones, there's other milestones, and it's always that journey, right?
It reminds me of like, I've been a meditator for so many years in my life, but when I first started in my 20s, it was like that mind chatter. You have this intense chatter that at first you don't even know that you're any different from. You don't know that you're not your chatter, right? And then as you're meditating, you're separating. You're like, oh, you're watching this mind do this stuff, and it's doing all kinds of horrible things most of the time. But you're witnessing it. You're like, oh, I'm not my mind.
Mhm, mhm.
And then eventually there's practices to, like, start to cultivate this sense of peace and this centeredness. But then there's so what kind of thoughts do you want to have? So it's sometimes, if you have this mind chatter and you don't even think you're any different than it, and then you put this positive affirmations on top of it, saying, oh, I am good, I am capable, I doesn't necessarily change what's going on underneath. And it was just like you were saying, like, it's been 20 years of practicing how to drive the boat, basically, and not let the boat drive you. So do you have any tips on how to be in charge of that maybe negative talk or negative monkey mind?
Yeah, well, the first thing is awareness, right? For me, that pivotal moment was, I went to this conference, and this speaker, I mean, there was, maybe a few hundred of us, and gets on stage, and his question was, who here would be friends with their mind if their mind was a separate entity, right? I raised my hand. I was like, yeah, absolutely. One of my favorite sort of quotes was in Latin, and I always say this wrong, but cogito ergo sum, which is I think, therefore I am. And I had always been like, yes, highly thinking, aware person. Absolutely, I'd be friends with my mind. And so they gave us a rubber band, right, very similar to what I have in my hand. And they said, okay, for the next hour, right? I just want you to listen to the messages that your mind tells you, right? And for anything remotely negative, remotely, disparaging or mean or, thoughtless or cruel, like snap your wrist, snap your band, right? And I was like, yeah, okay. For the next hour, right? This room full of people, all you hear snap, 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 right?
Huh?
And I had always I'd been proud that I'm a pragmatic optimist, but I err on finding the silver linings, the beauty in things. And I was there, snapping my wrist. And at the end of the hour, and maybe I did it way too, I was way into it or whatever, but at the end of the hour, my wrist was so bruised. And I almost drew blood from just the snap. And it was my first time of really being conscious and aware of, I'm not good enough, I didn't understand that, what's wrong with you, oh, I'm kind of uncomfortable, oh, did I wear the right snap, 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 right? And it was such a powerful aha moment for me to realize, first of all, how much is going on without us consciously being aware of it, right? And so out comes the speaker again, right? And asks the same question, who here would be friends with their mind if it was a separate entity? And I was like, oh my gosh, there's no way I would be friends with my mind. That is one cruel entity. And it was such a shock for me. But that's the first piece, right? At one point in time, I'll get my clients to do something very similar to that rubber band exercise where I'm like, just pay attention, even for a little, 20 minutes, and actually realize how much negative, background noise is going on all the time. And I think once you have a better understanding of really how pervasive it is and just how it's there all the time, that in itself, I think, is a really powerful exercise of just knowing. And then you can go at it in a logical, emotional, soulful way of replacing it with something that is more real, that is more empowering, that is more fulfilling and more meaningful. But it's really knowing exactly how much your mind isn't your friend, unfortunately.
And I mean, your mind is created to protect you, right? It looks for danger. It's a pattern maker. So if you have a habit of thinking or hearing self-talk that's really negative, which you probably sometimes inherit from your parents, the way they've talked to you or even the way they talk to themselves, and how, if you were talking to a little kid the way you talk to yourself, that's abuse, really, you know.
Yeah.
So it's interesting how we don't parent ourselves,
Mhm.
we very well. We do parent ourselves, but not very well. And when you were talking about mindset, this week is really about mindset. However, this imposter syndrome, I think, holds two elements to um, that my pillars. The first one is mindset, but the second one is being seen, that
Mhm.
community piece, and that not hiding,
Mhm.
and it's almost like we have to pretend we're a certain way, and it's built on a faulty foundation for
Yeah.
success,
Yeah.
right?
And you totally caught on to that because, when you read all the literature that's out there in terms of, how do we overcome imposter syndrome? Um, First of all, the standard sort of best practice is to talk about it.
Mm.
It's to share, it's to create a community of support, it's to raise it as a reality that most people feel. I mean, I think the stats is that 30% of people feel it consistently and 70% of people feel it at some point in their career, right?
Mhm, mhm.
And that's a lot of people.
Yeah.
In fact, I haven't really met anyone who hasn't experienced it, right? And part of it is having these discussions, talking about it, right? Getting the support and the help and that we could all use in terms of, this when you can't do it for yourself, right? Like when you can't actively replace it for whatever reason, having that hit list, your tribe, right? I always tell people, have like speed dial 5 really amazing people, right? Your supporters, the people that can tell you, remind you of how special and wonderful and capable you are when sometimes we forget, right? So yeah, I agree with you. I think it touches so much of how we live and how we act, and how it's necessary to really take a look at things holistically, right? Like really build a strong ecosystem. The first step is us. We need to work on ourselves, right? And then after that, it's really about shining the light out and creating that supportive environment, that ecosystem, that tribe, that community, right? Those people, and that's a big part to success, and however you define it.
I often tell this story to my community that when I was a kid, I grew up in a family that had very reliable income. No one was an entrepreneur. I think I had an uncle that lived in Toronto that was an entrepreneur, but everyone else worked for the big four auto company. So they had pensions and, or they worked for the school board. And I went to a friend's house for dinner, and her dad was an entrepreneur, serial entrepreneur. So he had been doing lots of stuff his whole life. And they had 4 kids. We'd sit at the dinner table and he would say, okay, so tell me one thing that you failed at today. And I was just like, what? Like, so everyone had to say something that they failed at. And he was like, okay, what did you learn? And he's like, everyone got to congratulate. They got an extra scoop of ice cream if they failed at something, because he's like, you're growing. If you're not failing, you're not growing. And he just wanted them to check the boxes. He said, the more times you fail, the more times you'll succeed. So it was just this beautiful, like, it blew my mind, and I never even thought about it being like something to celebrate. But now it's so much about celebrating. And I'm might be failing at something pretty soon, quickly, in a couple weeks. So I don't know if I will or not, but I'm stretching into. So I teach about money and financial literacy and all this stuff. So I would love your support in this as I share this. If you can maybe give me some advice on how to stand in it in a different way. So I am going to be speaking at the House of Beautiful Business. It's like a global movement on reimagining business. And so everyone's talk is so out of the box. Like, it's not just typical business stuff. It's like, okay, like, what if this had never been thought of, never imagined doing before? So the novel that I'm writing right now imagines a world that doesn't exist right now. So I'm doing this talk on mushrooms like mycelium, AI, the primitive brain, and a new way of exchanging money. So I'm doing this talk and I'm working on it. And I'm like, I never have spoken about this aloud before. But they're so receptive. They just want something completely out of the box. But I'm like, I don't even know what I'm going to write. It's all like kind of like a fantasy in my head. So it's like, I
I
just feel
love
like,
it.
yeah.
Love it. It's so fantastic. You know what? And it goes back to this feeling for everyone that it's always about the end result, right? It's always about like that final polished whatever it is that we see. And that is really just like the one picture of a whole movie of things that have had to happen to get to that point. And I'm so glad you're talking about it, because it's all a process. I mean, for me, when I talk about like coaching and, personal growth and exploration, it's an exploration, it's an adventure, because there's going to be pitfalls along the way, and you're going to trip and fall and fail fast, fall forward. It's about getting up and continuing in that journey, right? And
Mhm.
this is a perfect example of tackling something new, right? What an amazing opportunity to explore your creativity, and the whatever you come up with is never going to be your most polished version, because it doesn't stop, right? Like our philosophies, we grow, we evolve, our aha moments, our wisdom, right? Those are all gained with experiences. And part of it is going through it. It's just taking action, and cultivating this mindset of exactly this, like how do I inhabit a new space? I don't know. There's no one's got the answer for that. That's part of the beauty of life and your experiences and being authentically you. You're gonna find out when you get there.
Well, it's interesting too, because I was in clown school. So when I was in clown school, you do this all the time. You just like get up there and you do it, and that's the language of clowning. Like it's like uncertainty is the language of clowning. And but how I'm in business, like I'm talking to business people, and they are listening to me. So I'm going to be talking about AI. I'm a total newbie technophile. I'm going to be talking about mycology. I just geek out on mushrooms, but I don't know. I don't know everything. So I'm going to be presenting in a way that people might think I know more than I actually do. Right. So it's like there's this imposter kind of, I feel like I need to tell them ahead of time, okay, this is
Mm.
uncharted territory.
You know what? I think there's a difference between being vulnerable and authentic,
Mm,
and slightly devaluing yourself, right? And being like, oh no, seriously, like I'm not an expert, and not taking ownership. I think, one of the things that, and there's so much, like, it's such a buzzword now, right? Being authentic and, being vulnerable. But the reality is that we're all really clamoring for a sense of like realness,
mm,
the grittiness, the dirtiness, the unknowns, right? Like part of the reason why, I work with people who are more successful, like on paper, um, and the draw is that authenticness. It's not about knowing everything. No one does, right? It's about bringing your perspective, right? Your unique view on things that the world hasn't heard or seen yet, right? And that's
that,
that's that's exciting.
that just like makes my heart open when you say that what we're craving is that raw, authentic realness. And it's so true. It's so true. And I crave it. When I see it in someone, I'm like, oh, beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, like, the reason why Oprah became Oprah was because, I don't know if she was intentionally fearless about crying, when something touched her, but she couldn't help herself, right? She would be touched by whatever topic, subject she would have, and she would feel it. And, you know, the audience would see it and experience it with her,
Mm.
right? It's part of her journey, and how she ended up creating, her name and her brand, and her impact on the world, because she dared to be raw and real, you know
Sounds like that's the elixir. That's the medicine for overcoming imposter syndrome, is to just show up fully embodied and raw and real.
yeah, and scared and excited, and all of that.
Mhm.
I think especially within our world, where we are the experts, we have, there's a certain expectation that we have a certain, body of knowledge and experience, and certainly we bring that to the table. But really part of all of the sort of the magic, and for me, and the impact that I have on my client, is making sure that I remind them that this is about them
Mm.
and their journey and their definition of harmonious, success. That's why it's so broad. It's about what people find meaningful or purposeful, which is so different from other people. That's one of the questions that I ask them, when I start working with someone, is I'm like, how do you define, your version of harmonious success? right? And I'll get a variety of different answers, from like, I want to have $1 million, to financial freedom, to I just want to have, be able to cultivate a balanced life with my family and friends. And and that's part of it. It's like developing that for ourselves. And I think that's what takes us a really long time, to be honest, right? Is really figuring out what's authentic to us,
Mhm.
and what's real to us, and then having the courage to show that. And it does take courage. And what helps is having a community, having a positive mindset, having a growth mindset, of realizing that you are going to fail, you are going to fall. It's not always going to be, a straight shot to whatever, right? And that's part of it, right? And really seeing it as something exciting rather than daunting, right? Something to overcome rather than to, hold us back.
That's beautiful. I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that, because it just, when you say it and the way that you articulate it, it reminds us what we know to be true. Like, and when you hear truth and someone is as articulate as you, can hold that space and remind us and reflect it and mirror, that's the sign of a holistic, powerful, dynamic coach. So
I think we're very lucky that we live in a time where there's so much conversation about it, where there's more awareness, where it is starting to be part of everyday language, right? Because everybody needs support. Everybody, no person is an island. And part of it is, how can we strengthen those bonds? How can we strengthen our own, sense of self, so that we can give back to the world, so that we can live our truth, and have it be as purposeful and meaningful to everyone that we come in contact with and influence and impact.
So, just to recap a little bit, because we are navigating this landscape of overcoming imposter syndrome and recognizing the negative self talk or the limiting self talk, which is a real big piece of mindset. And what you had mentioned was awareness is key. You need to become aware of it first before you can take any action into it. And then, if we're just framing this mindset on imposter syndrome, I'm just going to highlight what I think, and you can fill in the blanks if
Sure.
you want. The second piece is being seen, sharing it, getting the taboo out of it, talk about it, show up. And then the third piece is just to be authentically true to who you are in that moment, whether it's excited, you're scared, or you're feeling insecure or whatever, but authentically show up the way you are. Don't put another mask on top of it. And is there anything else that you would add to those three? Awareness. uh,
Oh, so much, so much. Actually, one of the things that I do have on my website, SharinaCruz.com, is I have a link to a webinar that I held for UBC on overcoming imposter syndrome. And I
hmm,
talk about sort of the holistic mind, body, and soul, right? And the things that we can do in all those elements. And then, and like as you so beautifully captured it, that next sphere of influence is that community, right? So that's that inner work, and then there's that outer work. And that can only really happen if you do the work, right? And like really dig in and explore sort of what the barriers are, what the hurdles are, and create habits, a way of being that overcomes them, right? And that's there's no sort of magic bullet, unfortunately, right? It's all about really evolving and consciously doing so, and that's the kind of work that never ends. And thankfully, right, that's what makes life so exciting, is this possibility of of everything.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I would love to have another live with you at some point and dive deeper into some of your brilliance. I will put your website in the description of the talk. And if anyone wants to reach out to Sharina, she's an amazing coach. She's coached some of my most delightful people in my life, and I highly recommend her as you're not just a career coach, but you do all kinds of different things as well. But yeah, in a holistic way.
Yeah, you know what? It's an easy sort of qualifier for a lot of people, but really it is about working on everything, just like the work that you do, where sure it's money and finances, but it's so much more than that to really achieve the kind of vision and goals that we want to have and create in our lives. So yes, thank you so much, Brenda. Super fun. I would love to do this again with you. Thank you so much for having me and inviting me, and it's been a pleasure.
Yay. I'll talk to you soon. Bye.